Hi there, it's Jonathan here. This is 4100 and we're studying the history of Israel's kings. Today we're reading 2 Samuel chapters 5 to 7. Here we will find some of the more significant passages in the whole of the Bible. Chapter 5 begins with David being set apart as king by all of the united Israel. He's referred to as the shepherd of Israel, chapter 5, verse 2. This is very important. Remember, Jesus in John's Gospel reveals himself as the Good Shepherd, and we know that Jesus is the Davidic Messianic king. Well, maybe you don't know that. David, even though he is deeply flawed as a human being, is seen as the great type of the Messiah to come. When we read about promises to David later in chapter 7, these are understood as messianic promises to the line of David, to the one who will come to fulfill the type of kingship that David hinted at through his own imperfect reign. In the Psalms, whenever we read about the great king of Israel, they're often referring to the legend of David, but at the same time longing for the perfect Davidic king who is to come. When David is referred to as the shepherd of Israel, this is both a pointer forward to Jesus as the great shepherd, and also a reminder that God has sovereignly prepared this man for the role given him in the kingdom. Who would have thought that when David was a young man looking after sheep in obscurity, he was being shaped as a shepherd to ultimately become the shepherd of Israel? I wonder what God is up to in your life in the obscure places. Don't miss verse 4 and all the numbers. David was 30 years old when he became king. Think of Jesus and his public ministry beginning at age 30. David reigned for the classic period of time 40 years and reigned over Judah 33 years, the lifespan of Jesus pre the cross. Numbers matter in the Bible. Always keep your eye out for what they mean. Years ago when I visited Israel, we had travelled through Egypt, around the Sinai Peninsula, and then up through Jordan, the pathway of Moses. Then finally across the Jordan River from Mount Nebo, and then across Israel to the base of Jerusalem. Just before we drove into the holy city, our guide played the song Jerusalem in our car as we drove into the Mount of Olives to behold the classic view of Temple Mount and the city of Zion, Jerusalem. Jerusalem didn't always belong to the people of Israel. We're just about to read of when it was first conquered and established as the city of Yahweh. Chapter 5, David conquers the Jebusites and sets up Jerusalem as a fortress stronghold. Verse 18, don't miss the fact that David inquires of the Lord before going to battle, something that Saul failed to do from very early on in his reign as king. Chapter 6 is a classic chapter where Uzzah touches the ark in an irreverent way and ends up being struck dead by the Lord in anger. This does seem a little strange, but it's sending the very clear message that Israel's God is holy and must be revered and obeyed. When Ananias and Sapphira die in the book of Acts, a similar message is being communicated. The ark represented the presence of God, and so it was vitally important for David to bring the ark to Jerusalem, and in so doing, clearly invite Yahweh to be their God and to dwell in their midst. The presence of Yahweh in years to come became synonymous with Israel's confidence. Many psalms refer to this hope. The city of Jerusalem could never fall while Yahweh's presence was with his people. Of course, this all changed when God left the temple before its destruction, but that's a later part of the story. Chapter 6 famously has David dancing with abandon before the Lord and being mocked by one of his wives, the daughter of Saul, Michal. David says in 6:22, I will become even more undignified than this. Do you care about what other people think when you worship the Lord? David celebrated with all his heart the goodness of his God. Chapter 7 is a very important passage in all of the Bible. It's the great messianic promise that God made to David, outlining that David's descendant would reign forever and his kingdom never end. You want to be reading chapter 7 with a highlighter, always thinking about how Jesus fulfills these promises. God is doing a work for his people, but for his own name's sake. 7:26. Really, it doesn't get much bigger than this chapter, so make sure you get a feel for what the Bible is teaching here. Enjoy God's word.